Yeah, book nerds, I am sorry if you can hear noises outside. There's some yard work going on outside of the apartment, so I'm sorry if you can hear that on the video. But this is the only time I had to record this, so we'll just have to make do. I have finished The Bridge to Neverland, which is the 5th book in the Peter and the Starcatchers series by Dave Barry and Ridley Pearson. This book was completely different than the other 4 in the series, pretty much on every level. And while I have to say I definitely preferred the other books over this one, I did not hate this book. I just really don't think that it was necessary. This book takes place 100 years after book 4, approximately 100 years after book 4. So there's a lot of technology advancements, like the main character has an iPhone and iPad, like modern technology is in this book. We follow 2 teenagers, which is another difference. In the other books, the main characters have been like 12 years old, and these characters are like 15, 16, 17-ish. I forget exactly their ages, but they're in their teens, they're in high school. So the basic setup for this book is that these 2 teenagers discover a letter that was written by Miguel or Magel. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. And the big twist is that these teenagers, Sarah and Aiden, they think that Peter and the Starcatchers are all books. Like, they have owned and read the first 4 books in this series. And so, like, this is breaking the 4th wall, like, completely. And so they discover this letter from a person that they know from fiction books. And so then they're like, wait a second, I thought Peter and the Starcatchers was all fake. What if it's real? And so then they go on this adventure to try and discover the meaning of this letter. And I don't want to say too much more right now because we'll get into spoiler territory later. So that's pretty much the setup for this book. So we have really switched from fantasy. The first 4 books in the series were fantasy, and this book is much more sci-fi in my opinion. And you really get that, like, the second half of the book is a lot of sci-fi. And I think that's why this book didn't click a whole lot with me, because while there is some sci-fi that I like, I don't read it very often. And when I do read sci-fi, I'm very critical of it. And this just wasn't really my cup of tea on that front. But then again, it wasn't bad. It was entertaining. I have not read a book like this ever in my life. It was interesting from the get-go because they're trying to figure out what this letter means, and they have some clues. And there are some clues that you can actually, like, look up yourself in real life. Like, they reference actual page numbers in the first 4 books, and so you can go look at what those pages say, and it lines up with what they're talking about in here. And then, for example, they also get GPS coordinates at one point, and if you actually go look up those GPS coordinates, it's exactly what they're talking about in the book. It's kind of like you're on this adventure with them and you're trying to figure out these clues with them, because some of them you can actually look up yourselves. And so that was very interesting. And that kept me reading for a while. But overall, like, I just feel like this book wasn't really necessary to the series. And so now I want to get into more of what my likes and dislikes were with it. So I will give you a spoiler alert, because if you don't want to know anything more about the book, don't continue on watching this video until after you've read it. So some of the pros for this book, like I had said, are those clues, because those were interesting and fun to kind of like figure them out with the characters. I did enjoy that part of it. Sarah is kind of the main character. It's Sarah and her brother Aiden. But honestly, Aiden was my favorite of the 2 of them, because Aiden's sarcasm throughout this book is just really funny. It's my kind of sarcasm. So I want to tell you guys more about Aiden's sarcasm, but to do that, I'm going to have to tell you some more about the plot. So Aiden and Sarah have this letter from McGill or Magel, and they end up finding star stuff. And when they find the star stuff, Umbra shows up. And he shows up in the form of a giant flock of ravens. And he's trying to get the star stuff back from them so he can become as strong as he once was. Because that's why he's in the ravens, is because he's so weak. And so Sarah and Aiden find this guy, JD, who knows about the history of the Starcatchers and stuff. And so they kind of team up together, and they're being chased and they don't know what to do with the star stuff. And JD at one point is like, I have an idea, but it's going to sound really weird. And Aiden says, we're being chased by a huge flock of birds inhabited by an evil being. We made a police van fly. Nothing you say is gonna sound weird. And I just, like, he does this throughout the entire book, and I just really enjoy Aiden being so sarcastic all the time. So yeah, so that kind of brings me into the plot. So yeah, Umbra returns again, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But keeping with the things that I liked about the book, the humor, obviously. There was some adult humor, again, sprinkled in here. Not heavy, not too horrible adult humor, but like a little bit that might go over some of the younger kids' heads. And Hook is in this, and again, he's just that bumbling idiot. And they even acknowledge that in this book. The mollusks say that they allow Hook to remain on the island because he's entertainment for them. And I just enjoyed that. Because that's what I think he is. He's just purely entertainment. He's not a villain. You don't take Hook seriously because he's just a moron, to be honest. So getting into the things that I didn't like about this book. First of all, there wasn't any pictures in this book like the other four. I'm just kidding. I don't need pictures in my book. But it was kind of interesting that of all 5 books, they're all middle grade. This is the only one that doesn't have illustrations in it. Side note, I guess. But anyway, getting into the real things that I didn't like about this book. The main character, Sarah, and even Aiden a little bit, I really felt like I didn't get to know them at all before we jumped right into them finding this letter and going on this adventure together. And so like Sarah and Aiden aren't in the other book, so I don't know them at all, and I have no interest in them as characters, to be honest, because I don't know them. And so like from the beginning of the book, I'm wondering where Peter and the rest of the gang from the other 4 books are, and I got nothing. I got Sarah, and honestly, like, there is nothing about her that stands out. Like, I don't know her at all. They say she likes her hairstyle like the 80s. That's about all that I have for character development for her. And Aiden likes video games. Like, that's it. And so, like, I don't know these characters, and I don't like that. I guess I can say the same thing about in book 4 with Wendy versus Molly. Like, Wendy versus Child Molly from the first 3 books, there was really nothing to distinguish them. And they make a joke about how Wendy is just like her mother, except that, you know what, like, I get told that I'm like my mom a lot, and I am, but there's also things that aren't like my mom. And in here, like, there's just nothing that makes me feel like Wendy is her own person. And so, like, the character development in these last 2 books, like, I needed more. I definitely needed more. I also think that their quest to figure out this letter was way too easy. Like, yeah, the clues were interesting, but I also feel like they figured out these clues way too fast, way too easy. They're on a time crunch to figure these out because they know they need to figure out what this means while they're in England, but they're only in England on a week trip with their family. So like they get like 1 shot to figure out all these different clues, and they somehow magically figure them all out like that. It just seemed way too easy for me. Like there should have been more like trial and error on their part. I get that it's middle grade, and so like, yeah, it's supposed to be easy, but still it felt way too easy. For example, like one of the clues leads them to this tile in the floor that's discolored from other tiles. And so like personally, like I thought, oh, they must need to dig it up. It must be something underneath that tile. But no, they don't think of that at all. Instead, they decide to trace the tile onto a piece of paper and they take that with them. Like, who thinks of that? Like, I didn't understand some of the logic with some of the clues and how they figured some of this out. It was just too easy. The other thing I didn't like is that this is part of the Peter Pan and the Starcatchers series, and Peter isn't in it really at all. He doesn't show up until like almost 100 pages left of the book. It's like 400-page book, and like he finally shows up when there's only 100 pages left. And so like the entire time I'm reading this, because it's part of the Peter Pan series, and he's not even hardly in it. And so I didn't like that. And I understand the need because of the way the plot progresses, but it just made this book feel like it didn't belong with the rest of the books. This book does become very sci-fi. You find out that Peter Pan and the Lost Boys and the island and everything is now in some alternate dimension. Sarah and Aiden and JD have to figure out a way to get to that alternate dimension and get Peter back to our dimension. And they do figure out a way, and they go and they bring him back. And that whole thing is just very weird. So they find out that this portal to this other dimension, this bridge to this other dimension, is in Disney World. And that fact alone made me feel like this entire book was just a plug for Disney World. They talk a lot of descriptions about Disney World and the different attractions and how wonderful Disney World is and how magical. And it just really felt like a plug for Disney World. And that whole thing just creates so many plot holes. So when they're in Disney World, they go on the Peter Pan flight ride from the Disney movie Peter Pan. But the Disney movie is based off of J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. But we don't really have that Peter Pan in these stories. We have Dave Barry and Ridley Pearson's Peter Pan. And so like, we talk about Dave Barry and Ridley Pearson's books in here, but there's no mention of J.M. Barrie and that influence. And it's very muddled, very confusing, and doesn't make a whole lot of sense once you start to break down. It just doesn't. It's really hard to explain until you read it. Like it feels like fan fiction and very bad sci-fi. When they go get Peter and then they come back to this dimension, no time has passed here, which I could accept that, except that there are other times where people have gone there and come back and time does pass. So it just is very inconsistent. Peter Pan goes and comes back and time passes when he does it. So why didn't time pass when Sarah and JD go back and forth on the bridge to this other dimension? Like, I didn't like it. I just feel like the authors were trying to insert themselves into this book, and I just didn't like it. When the authors inserted J.M. Barrie as a character in the second book, I loved that. That was awesome. That was so adorable. It was such a nod to the original creator. But when they insert themselves in here, even though I don't think, if I remember right, they don't even name themselves, but they say the authors of the Peter and the Starcatcher books, like I just didn't like it. It just was weird. It wasn't for me. And then finally, like the last thing that I didn't like about this was they leave it on a cliffhanger. So Umbra is back again. We've literally blown him up like 4 times and he's still here. So like, we blow him up at the end of this one, blow him up again at the end of this one, and blow him up again with star stuff at the end of this one. So 3 times he gets blown up with star stuff and he's still alive in here, which makes no sense because what about the other shadow creatures? There are a ton of them in here and they all seem to have died and it's only Umbra that's left. So again, for the fourth time, we're facing Umbra. And this time, instead of using star stuff to blow him up, Peter uses fireworks. And then he says, I think we've seen the last of Umbra. And immediately I was like, are you kidding? If star stuff has failed to kill him 3 times, how in the world are fireworks going to kill him? And then, yeah, like a few pages later, we realize, yeah, he's still alive. And so, like, can Umbra ever die? And so it ends on a cliffhanger because we know Umbra's still there. He's just really weak, and Peter's just kind of watching him. And that's how it ends. And I did not like that ending at all. I would have much preferred if it had ended on the 4th book. Actually, though, I really wish it had just ended with the 3rd book. The original 3 books, those were the best. The original 3 books were just the best. I enjoyed these the most. 4, I can live with the 4th book. The 5th book was just completely unnecessary, I feel like. So if you're going to read this, I definitely say the first 3 are worth it. 4, yeah, it's good. I'll accept number 4. 5, you can definitely skip if you don't want to read it. It's not bad, but it is so completely different from the others, and it just ends the whole series in a way that I felt was very unsatisfying, I'll be honest. But this is just my opinion, so please read it for yourself and tell me your thoughts in the comments. I sure hope that that review made sense, because I feel like I rambled on and it may not have made sense, but honestly that book was kind of all over the place, and there were parts of it that you just really had to suspend reality to believe it, because some of it just really didn't make any sense at all when you think about the big picture. And it wasn't for me. I don't know that I'll ever reread it. I'll keep it on my shelf since I did read it and it's part of the series. But I definitely loved the first 3 books the best. 4, I can accept. 5, I think it would have been better if they just stopped while they were ahead. That's my opinion. So what have I started now? Of course, I've already started another book. I have started The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. And this is actually a reread for me. I read this, I believe, in high school. It might have been junior high. I feel like it was high school. But I don't really remember a whole lot from it. I remember the basics. And I've been just really wanting to reread it lately, so I decided I'm just going to do it. It's really short. It's only 180 pages. I'm already on chapter 4. And so, like, I know I'm just going to fly through this reread. And then I will post a review for this when I'm done. But I'm enjoying this reread already. And it's a classic, you know, or a modern classic, depending on your definition of classic. And so, like, I was missing my classics after reading this series, and so I'm really happy to get back to some classics. And so yeah, enjoying it already. I feel like I'm going to just love it. And I needed that after this last book because that one was such a struggle to get through. So I'll just end by giving you guys an update on the reading challenge I'm doing. If you missed my last video, you may not know that I am participating in a reading challenge during the month of June. It's for the Epilepsy Foundation. For this challenge, you're supposed to read 780 minutes total for the month, which ends up being 26 minutes a day, which is for the 1 in 26 people that will be diagnosed with epilepsy in their life. And with this challenge, we are also fundraising. I have a personal goal of $200. So far, I've raised over $100 of that goal. The Epilepsy Foundation has an overall goal of $100,000. So far, all of the participants have raised over $30,000 for this challenge. That is awesome. I am so excited to be participating in this. It's already been fun. And so, yeah, it is just a great cause. I get to read and support something I love, and the fundraising has been going well. And so, yeah, if you want to check it out, I have that information in the description box below. If you decide to join or donate, I really appreciate it. So that is all for me this week. I hope you guys are having a wonderful week. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and check out my Facebook for more content from me throughout the week. And my Facebook is where I am posting daily updates on my reading challenge. So if you want to stay up to date every day, head over there. Otherwise, I will see you guys next week. Thanks for talking books with me.